Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Greg Amundson. So Greg has come recommended to me. He is the founder of something called Satvana Yoga. He's trained in Krav Maga, so I'm going to talk about that. And he's famous for CrossFit. He's got a background in all kinds of interesting things, from police work, religious work, all kinds of interesting things, actually. So really looking him up, it's just so many broad things we could talk about. So happy to have you on the show today, Greg. Welcome.
Thank you, brother. It's good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Joining us from Santa Cruz, California, right?
Yes, sir. Exactly. Santa Cruz, California. Beautiful
town. So tell us about your journey. How did you get interested in the body? What was your route into working with the body?
My earliest childhood memories are my dad driving me to the YMCA, which was an athletic club in California. He's driving me to the YMCA to exercise. And as we're en route to the gym to exercise, he's listening to audio cassette tapes of Deepak Chopra and Wayne Dyer. So from a very young age, I'm starting to be immersed in the mind, body, spirit connectivity, ultimately how those are all integrated. Then my dad was a chiropractor during this time in my life as well. And so my dad instilled in me so much appreciation for the capacity of the human body, how to care for the body, how to strengthen the body, how to maintain alignment of the body. The alignment of the body was necessitated by ensuring further alignment with the mind and with the spirit. And so anything and everything that I've accomplished up to this point in my life, when I reflect on, is due to the amazing mentorship that was provided by my mom and dad.
I think, we're lucky whoever our parents are. And I feel that the same. My mom was actually a Catholic nun before she stopped doing that. Wow. And met my dad. So I was thinking about her when I was listening to some of your stuff on the kind of more Christian front. So
yeah, that is awesome.
About some of that today.
Awesome.
And then I don't know all your whole work here, but you got involved in the police service, right? So you were working really on the sharp edge of things with the police in, was it Santa Cruz or LA, somewhere out there?
I've been all over the country doing police work, and that was also something that was in my fabric. The way that God designed me from a very young age was with the capacity, the interest, the passion in the warrior archetype, in protecting and serving others. I have a photograph on my refrigerator of me probably 5 or 6 years old, fully dressed up head to toe in my dad's naval uniform. So again, you see the theme of how the influence of my parents, in particular my dad, when it came to my interest in the warrior archetype, was infused in every cell in my body. So when I began to mature into adulthood, I was drawn, magnetized almost towards the law enforcement culture. It resonated so much with me. I identified with the warrior. And for me, the expression of the warrior, the natural draw, the inclination was to law enforcement. It really matched at a very deep primal level where I felt God was leading me.
And now you talk about warrior yoga and this warrior archetype. And some people might misunderstand the sort of path of the warrior as being about killing. Whereas actually, that very beautiful saying to protect and serve, to me, seems more at the core of it. So do you want to say what you mean by the warrior archetype?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a great question because so much of the public speaking I do today to law enforcement military organizations has to do with the warrior archetype because it's very often misunderstood. And what I tell law enforcement and military operators, oftentimes they resist this proposition, is that just because you are in a warrior profession does not make you a warrior. And so I've served alongside many people who wear a uniform who are very far removed from deep identification and resonance with the warrior archetype. Therefore, this idea of having to define the warrior is of the utmost importance because everyone claims to be a warrior in those professions. So this definition of the warrior, this came to fruition during a podcast that was being recorded with a gentleman named Mark Devine and myself. We were on a podcast talking about this very subject, and what we collectively came up with was this definition of warrior. A warrior is one who masters themselves to be of greater service to the world. In other words, you see on one side of the coin self-mastery, on the other side service. And what I found is that those two things have to be harmoniously integrated in order for one to authentically, credibly serve other people. If you're drawn towards protection and service, there has to be a level of self-mastery. Mm-hmm. Now, what's interesting, though, is self-mastery ultimately has to come first, and it has to be what I call sadhana, the Sanskrit word for daily practice. Every day, those people that want to walk and remain on the warrior path, they have to take steps every day to further develop themselves across a wide spectrum of disciplines, mind, body, spirit, because only in self-mastery can they then begin to authentically, credibly serve other people.
Yeah, this is the first kind of place we have, the first system we've got to manage. The first thing to get together is ourselves. And, the martial arts, which is my own background, that's very much the emphasis here. And there's also words in Japanese for this kind of idea of daily training. It's not something like go to university and get a degree and then right now I'm a doctor, I'm done. This is a thing that needs daily refinement, daily is a never-ending journey.
Yes, and brother, what you've touched on is a huge challenge that's facing our country in law enforcement. The tradition of law enforcement is you train very, very hard during a 4 to 6 month academy. Mm-hmm. Upon graduation, unless you're in a very forward-thinking department, there's no further incentive to maintain any semblance of training. And because many people come into the profession with no athletic background, the 6 month academy sometimes is detrimental to people because they associate training with punishment, with discipline. And as soon as they're done with the academy, there's been no motivation, no inspiration to maintain and continue their physical training. Yep. And sadly, we see officers 5 years on the job who are in very poor condition. Needless to say, that poor physical condition is further expressed in the quality of their thinking, in the quality of their spiritual life. It's all integrated. Mm-hmm. And really, the future for law enforcement is inspiring people on this very path to maintain daily disciplines that allow them to serve and protect the public to the best of their ability.
Well, that's so nice to hear. And often in the rest of the world, listeners here are from the US, but also UK, Sweden, Germany, Russia, all over the world. We only see the American police when something goes wrong, in those cases where there's been a problem. And that certainly makes sense to me that there's a degradation if you're not continuously practicing whatever you do. And one can't be expected to practice it in the field where there's kind of life and death at stake.
Right. It has to be practiced daily, and so that in moments of peril, the training is readily available. What's interesting, too, is we have a department in the U.S. under the Department of Justice. The FBI is a premier department within the United States. They maintain statistics on assailants who harm law enforcement officers. They question these suspects, these assailants, on why they attacked the law enforcement officer. And the theme is that the suspect, the assailant, thought, based on the physical perception of the officer, that they could take the officer, which means that body composition, presentation of the officer, their physical training, is in fact what will be considered a use of force. And so if an officer arrives on scene and they look physically fit, they are simply by their presence able to defuse a potentially hostile situation.
Yeah, at the end of it, criminals are rational people at the end of the day. They're looking at, I don't want to, start something and I'm going to get hurt if I go with that guy because he's got physical presence, both in his stature but also in his manner. And as you said, and the other piece to that, of course, is the ability to keep calm. So on the one hand,
Exactly.
you have the kind of more traditional warrior skills. It might be like fitness, and we'll talk about Krav Maga and other kind of really skills that may seem more practical, but an equally set of practical skills is the emotional, communicative. Can you actually convey warmth to someone as well as power?
Yeah, so beautiful, brother. And something I elaborated on, it's challenging because it's an intangible quality of the training that takes place. In my book, Fire Breather Fitness, I reflected on my time as a deputy sheriff in Santa Cruz, and as my training in the mind, body, spirit continued to evolve, my presence on scene with very violent, hostile people, just my presence, not my physical presence, although that was a contributing factor, mainly my mental faculty, the fact that I was resonating in my mind with peace, with tranquility, with a cooperative resolution to the problem that was taking place. That mindset essentially infiltrated the mind of the other person, and that resulted in a peaceful resolution. And we see this in the historical texts on the warrior. We look at the Art of War, the Book of Five Rings. The authors, although they were so skillful in their physical capacity, they continually inspired the reader to realize that winning in the mind ultimately resulted in winning in the field of battle. And to win in the mind, in the Christian tradition, that's turning the other cheek. And so if we can be in the presence of a potentially hostile person and mentally turn the other cheek away from violence, we immediately begin to connect with that other soul on a very deep level.
Yeah, I've lived in some very violent places, like slums of Brazil, for example. But I was doing a lot of Aikido and martial arts at the time, and to have that presence of both physicality, but also, as you say, the turning of the cheek or the being able to blend with people. And in Aikido terms, it's blending and harmonizing. Certainly, I knew one Aikido instructor who worked in the slums of Brazil for 30 years, and he said, "I've never had a problem here." He just, right. His being was such that he just didn't draw violence. He didn't create conflict. So there's more to it than the physical skills. Okay, well let's, you've got loads of great stories from your police work. I heard a few of them researching you, and you're on your own podcast, and people can look those up in your books. Let's talk about the body in terms of CrossFit then, because you're the first person we've had from CrossFit on, and I'm sure we're also going to come back to the mind within this. But for those who are completely new to it, who missed the craze as it went across the world, what is CrossFit and what is your particular take on it?
I found CrossFit when there was no CrossFit.com. There was no worldwide influence. There was one CrossFit gym in an 800 square foot garage. It wasn't even what we would call a gym. It was a garage. And I found CrossFit by necessity, because I was working as a deputy sheriff in Santa Cruz, and I had been in a horrific fight in which I nearly had lost my life. As I was fighting that suspect, it felt as if my mind and body were antagonistic. My mind was trying to communicate to my body, yet my body was resistant to what my mind was saying. It was a terrifying feeling to have a disconnect between my mind and my body. Fortunately, I made it through that ordeal, and it inspired me to begin a quest to try to recreate in my physical training the sensation I'd had there on the street that night. Yet nothing I could do on my own was enough to bring back that feeling of I'm about to die.
Right. You needed the intensity.
I needed the intensity. So in my research, in my searching, a friend of mine had heard a rumor that was circulating around Santa Cruz about a crazy gym, a crazy coach, crazy workouts. And this rumor was circulating at that time in a very small, close-knit group of people that were all practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There was a world-renowned teacher in Santa Cruz named Claudio Franca, Master Franca. And he had become friends with Greg Glassman, the founder of CrossFit. Many of his top fighters were using CrossFit. Well, I heard this rumor, and that was enough to capture my attention, and it was intriguing. So I found the phone number in the phone book. That's how old school this is. And I called the number, and the number rang into a landline inside the gym. Coach Greg Glassman, the founder of CrossFit, actually answers the phone. And I said, hey, you know, I'm a sheriff in town. I've heard about the gym. Can I come work out? He said, absolutely, be here tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. So the next day I roll in and it's about 5:45. I know the county of Santa Cruz very well, and I'm driving down a road called Research Park Drive, and I know there's no gyms. This is a very industrial part of the county. I think I'm lost for a moment, but I find the address and I pull into the parking lot. There's a small window over a roll-up garage door that's already fogged over. I knock on the door. None other than Glassman, the founder of CrossFit, opens the door, extends his hand, and he says, welcome. And I walk in the gym, and there's two people in there. There's Coach Glassman. The other guy would go on to be my training partner for the first year of my training. His name is Mike Weaver. Mike Weaver at that time was already a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He went on to be one of the first Americans to win a black belt tournament in Brazil. The guy
that's a big deal. That's a really big deal.
Yeah, especially in 2001. You know, this guy was a legend. And what Mike used to say is that if you're doing jiu-jitsu and you're equally matched in technique, the person that's doing CrossFit will win. It's like if you're doing CrossFit, you're cheating. It's that much of an advantage on the mat. And what happened that day was amazing. Because what Coach said, as he introduced me to Mike, he said, you're going to work out against Mike. And the key word there is against, because I worked out with people, but against someone, I only went against someone in martial arts. So this was interesting. Like, oh, what does it mean to go against someone in a workout? And as Coach outlined what would take place in the workout, we would be doing this evolution of rowing on a concept to rower, kettlebell swings, and pull-ups. We would be racing each other, thus going against each other.
So these idea of little stations where you do different things, now that's really common in gyms, but at the time that was pretty new, right? Especially some of them with body weight, and some of them involve sort of gymnastic skills. You know, this was not just using the machines in the gym. This was an entirely new concept, which now has been ripped off and it's all over the world in different forms. But that was new, that was fresh at that point. And as you say, competitive with it, that was real fresh.
Yeah, it was fresh. It was radical. It was genius. It really was. And I had an incredible athletic background up to that point in my life. I'd been training my entire life. Yet everything we did that day in the gym was new to me. I'd never seen a concept two rower. I'd never seen or used a kettlebell. The type of pull-up was a gymnastic pull-up called a kipping pull-up that generated momentum and power from the hip. I'd never seen that. All my pull-ups in the academy in law enforcement had been strict. And so everything I did in that workout was brand new. It was incredible. And what's most interesting is that just about 2 or 3 minutes into the workout, I felt, oh man, I'm in a fight for my life. It felt like I was going to die if I continued to maintain that pace. Yet I had to maintain that pace because I was racing against somebody. And I had a coach there who was encouraging me and motivating me and directing me to keep going. It's exactly what I had been searching for, yet there's no way I could have created that on my own. And at the end of the workout, I crumbled up into a heap on the floor, and Glassman came over and in his humorous tone asked me if I wanted to go another round. And I said, no, I'm good. You know, and I knew in that moment I'd found what was for me the holy grail of fitness. And I never looked back. I continued day after day to go to that gym and to subject myself to those workouts. And to this very day, I continue to travel all around the world teaching CrossFit, these principles to everyone that will listen, but specifically I'm targeting law enforcement because I know firsthand that program saved my life. And I know based on testimonials of deputies, agents, officers, it saved their life as well.
Because so replicating the intensity of the kind of intensity you would sometimes find in the kind of sharp end of that job.
Exactly. It gives people an edge because they are now beginning to develop a level of comfort in an inherently uncomfortable environment, which is law enforcement, the warrior profession. The warrior needs to be able to be the calm in the storm, comfortable in the uncomfortable. And these are all metaphors that can ultimately be experienced in that CrossFit workout. And one of my yoga teachers once said something profound. He said, a principle felt is understood. And so we can talk theoretically about having mental toughness, about having perseverance. Yet when you're in a workout at that level of intensity, you really come face to face with mental toughness, with perseverance, with faith, with determination. You experience that at the physical level.
That's a dojo. That's not a textbook. That's a place where you learn skills in reality through sweat and blood, not theoretical learning, which doesn't count for much when the shit really hits the fan.
Exactly.
So, CrossFit now is mental global. Like I was talking to a guy in Sweden. It says it's big there. I was in Kiev just a month ago, and there was a purpose-built CrossFit gym in Kiev, down a big place as well. And, it's all over the world now. So it sounds like you were really there at the early stages of this.
I was there from the ground floor, one of the founding athletes. I'm referred to oftentimes in CrossFit as the original fire breather. So I'm about as old school, original gangsta as
And when you were first recommended to this show, someone said, hey, he's a CrossFit guy. And I was like, yeah, I don't really, CrossFit, it's exercise. It's not really embodiment. It's not body mind. It's just some, I get it. If people want to get fit, they can get a bee sting, and it's kind of fun and, cool, each to their own. But I was thinking you wouldn't be the sort of person for the show. And then I looked more into your background and I saw, okay, this guy does yoga. This guy's super into like mindset, the martial arts we'll talk about. So is there a way in which you're bringing more kind of mind into this than generally is, or is that just something that's been lost elsewhere?
Well, between 2001 and 2004, I was very focused on the physical adaptation of CrossFit. Then in 2004, there was a life-changing experience, something that Coach Glassman said to me. We were at Seattle at a small gym teaching one of the very first certifications that was outside the home base gym in Santa Cruz. During this experience, a 3-day certification, there were these two athletes that had been going head-to-head in all the workouts. And in every workout, they nearly tied each other, which was not common to see athletes at this level finishing within just a few seconds of each other. On the final workout, there were two stations. There's a movement called clean and jerk, which is a barbell movement where a barbell goes from the ground all the way overhead. One of the most challenging movements to do with weight. The next station was called a muscle up on rings. That means that the athlete begins in full suspension under gymnastic rings. They pull themselves all the way up, then transition into the bottom of a dip, then press to what's called support. That movement in gymnastics for a gymnast on the rings, it counts as 0 points. Yet for someone that's a non-gymnast,
it's a hard move. It's a lot harder than a pull-up, right? That's a serious move. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, Glassman once said the muscle up is the world's highest pull-up and world's lowest dip combined in the same movement. It's a monumental achievement in someone's athletic training. It takes years to get that skill. Well, this workout was 30 clean and jerks followed by 10 muscle-ups. These athletes, they finished the clean and jerk at the same time. They began to run by Glassman and myself. We're watching, observing this final workout. As they run by Glassman and I, one of the athletes says, I've never done a muscle up before. Today, I'm going to get my first one. Off they go to the rings. The other athlete says, I've never done a muscle up before. There's no way I can complete this final workout. They go to the rings. Well, I'll accelerate through the story. What happens is the athlete that affirmed their ability to succeed, they succeeded. They achieved their first muscle up and then went on to do 9 more to complete the 10 required reps. The athlete that said there's no way I can complete the workout ultimately failed. They were not able to achieve the skill. When that weekend wrapped up, here's the words of wisdom Coach said to me. He pulled me aside and he said, you know what, kid? The greatest adaptation to CrossFit takes place between your ears. And that that hit me like a ton of bricks. You know, I'll say it again because it's so good. He said, the greatest adaptation to CrossFit takes place between the ears. And that was a life-changing moment because that opened my mind to the possibility that everything I've been doing in the gym was in fact conditioning my mind even more than my body. Ultimately, what separated those two athletes had nothing to do with their physical capacity. It had everything to do with the quality of their thinking. And I tell people that for me, that was a 1 degree change in the trajectory of my life. It was just 1 degree, but that was in 2004. Now we're 2018. So a 1 degree change over years, I'm an entirely different person than I would have been had I not heard those words spoken over me, my glassman, because the trajectory led me deeper and deeper into understanding the function of the mind, the function of the spirit, how those are all interrelated, and how unless we're integrating, holistically developing these qualities, the faculties of our being, we're leaving a significant amount of potential on the table.
Yeah. So I've heard you, teach about kind of, be careful what you think, because that becomes what you say. This becomes your actions. This becomes your character. This is the sort of beginnings of it, even just in the mind and in terms of mindset, and it's solidifying in, I guess, what we on this show probably call embodiment, your way of being, your embodied way of doing things, your character, and that's leading to the kind of outcomes you're having. And this is kind of classic American style personal growth. And I think there's more out there, but there's a lot in this, right? There's a lot in this, and this isn't obvious to many people.
No, I think what's hard for people to fathom, and I have a new book that comes out tomorrow, as a matter of fact, called The Warrior and the Monk. And in the book, the warrior is doing his best to inspire this warrior. The monk is doing his best to inspire the warrior to realize that words are things. What we speak is a seed that is planted into the fertile soil of pure potentiality. What we say will in time produce after its kind. And because the faculty of speech, the faculty of thought happens at the subconscious level, we tend to take it for granted. We don't realize that the effects of our life today were caused by something potentially years ago. The cause of every effect of our life was in the thought realm. It was in the spiritual, supernatural realm. And that's a hard concept to grasp because it's elusive.
It could sound abstract, couldn't it? It could sound abstract. And I guess if I like this a lot, and if I had one concern with it, sometimes this is kind of presented as, we've all created our own lives. So if someone is in a bad situation, it's like, okay, they didn't have the right thoughts. They weren't. Sometimes there's a sort of tyranny of kind of this American style positive thinking, which can really be a way of kind of justifying inequalities. How would you respond to that? Like, how on the one hand we say, I'm responsible. It's my mind, it's my words, it's my life. And simultaneously, we're not all given the same cards.
I'm in seminary school right now, full-time seminary student. We just did a deep dive into the 3 books of the Bible that have to deal with wisdom: Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Job. They approach wisdom differently. They account in different ways for the karmic experience, which is the Eastern philosophy, where everything we say produces after its kind, cause effect. That's what we see in Proverbs. That's what we see in Ecclesiastes. Now, Job accounts for the supernatural, for the fact that even though one could say, if you're experiencing A was caused by B, or B was caused by A, there's a cause and effect. Even though that is certainly an argument, we have to account for the supernatural, for the miraculous, for the divine omnipresent power of God. Therefore, we know, based on historical accounts of every sage, every saint, every spiritual practice does account for the fact that we create our experiences. And the substance for creation is word. Even Genesis, the earliest recording of creation, God spoke. So we know, being made in God's image, that the faculty of our speech can produce an effect in our life.
And this, the first words of Genesis in the beginning was the word. I mean, this is a Judeo kind of Christian idea, which I think resonates very deeply in ways that, you don't have to be Christian to get this. Actually, I'm super excited to talk to you about embodied Christianity, because many people who come on the show are atheists, or they have Buddhist backgrounds or Hindu backgrounds. And in Britain, it's far less common to meet kind of educated people who are Christian. We're a much more secular country than the States, as is most of sort of Northern Europe. But personally, I'm very comfortable with talking scripture. I've been really enjoying Jordan Peterson's views on the psychology of the Old Testament. And I have this background in my own family, so I'm very, very happy to talk this, because I think it's a real opportunity for the show. And I just want to, listeners out there, I want to just say, hey, be open-minded to this. If we're open-minded on this show to Buddhist ideas or Hindu ideas, well, why not Christian ideas? There's a wisdom tradition there.
Absolutely. And in the book, The Warrior and the Monk, part of my research in preparing that book was to find the unity in the timeless wisdom of the saints, the sages, the prophets. Collectively, spirituality is at the heart a unifying body of wisdom, of tradition, of knowledge, of revelation. Religion potentially creates boundary, yet spirituality, mysticism, is designed to unify, to bring people together. Yeah. There's nothing that I found contradictory or that is creating opposition between spiritual paths. It seems to be very, very unified in its approach. And one of the unifying factors of the spiritual path is this sacredness of the word, of the spoken word, the sacredness of the thought, the sacredness of consciousness, of pure awareness. These are qualities that bring us closer to a divine experience of life. We become essentially merged with the source of creation. When we embody, when we represent the cause of creation, we can begin to create, taking greater levels of responsibility for the effects in our life.
And I watched the yoga class that you did, and there was some kind of nice classical yoga in there, and there was kind of more American style personal growth, motivation stuff, and then there's bits of Christianity, there's bits of Buddhism, and actually it was a lovely blend. It actually worked, it really worked. I listened to it last night and I was like, yeah, that works. There's a perennial philosophy there.
Absolutely. One of the really interesting points of unification I found in this research for the book was, I studied TM, Transcendental Meditation, found in my Maharishi. In meditation, which is part of the mystic approach to spirituality, all the sages, all the saints are recommending a meditative practice, period of stillness, silence, contemplation. What happens as we begin to meditate is the faculty of our mind that normally projects into the world and attaches with materialism is reversed, known as pratyahara in yoga, where we reverse the tendency of the mind to project into the world. We turn the attention inward. In that turning the attention inward, we reflect our soul back to us, which is a profound experience to have. As we reflect our true nature back to us, we begin, as we would say in Christianity, to experience the kingdom of God, which is within us. Because the tendency of the unbridled mind is to assume falsely that happiness, that contentment, with satisfaction, with joy, will be found out there in the world. And this is ultimately the cause of suffering. This is what the Buddha is describing, is anything that we think will cause happiness out there, in the moment of attachment, we're attaching to something that's already changing. Now that's suffering, because we're trying to prevent something that's temporal, that's nature to change. We're trying to keep it the same. And all of these traditions are teaching, hey, there's another way, there's another path that can lead to happiness, to fulfillment. And that path is ultimately the journey within.
Yeah, yeah. There's lots of beautiful kind of Christian sayings and scripture on that, isn't there? About, seek first the kingdom of God, and that sort of that turning towards the soul, the turning towards the heart. There's different ways of putting it. I mean, say something about the Christian view or a Christian mystical view of the body, because often I hear in body circles, kind of Christianity gets a bashing. People say, Christianity is anti-body. And there's this. And then, like in any religion, there's different traditions, right? So already, if you're generalizing that much, you're probably saying something that's false. But like, is there a Christian view of the body that could be aligned with kind of yoga and these kind of body-mind practices?
What I found when I look at the Old Testament, the presence of God in the Old Testament was necessitated to take place in what was called a tabernacle. The tabernacle was the Holy of Holies, where the presence of God would descend from the heavens onto the earth. Within the tabernacle, God could reside safely because the power, the presence of God, unless it was contained in a safe environment, a safe tabernacle, would be inapproachable.
People would go blind. This sort of mythology is people would be blinded or be struck dead or turn into salt or whatever, right?
Exactly. Well, what happens in the New Testament is profound, because in the New Testament, Jesus came and Jesus said he was the new tabernacle. He was the temple. Yet Jesus lived safely with mankind. The presence of God lived with humankind. Then what Jesus inspired the disciples to understand was that you and I, the disciples, mankind is that new creation, and that we are now the tabernacle. We are the residing place for the presence of God. The temple now that was so cared for in the Old Testament, the tabernacle was sacred. It was protected. It was pure. It was an amazing, holy place. In the New Testament, you and I, the human body, is now that sacred place, that tabernacle, which leads me to believe that we need to care for the body. It is the presence, the holy place where the presence of God can reside. Now, that's the metaphysical approach. But at the practical approach, I know firsthand that when I do not feel physically well, it is simply harder for me to remain in union, in awareness of the presence of God when I'm sick. I'm sure you've experienced that.
Even just on simple things, like let's say, any spirituality has an element of ethics, and just being a kind, decent person is so much easier when I'm connected to myself, when I'm healthy, when I've been eating well, when I've slept, when I'm not off center, when I've been doing my yoga. I walked along the beach this morning, I climbed a mountain a couple of days ago. And, for me to be open-hearted or kind of, touching the spirit of God, whatever language you put it in, it's just so much easier when I'm well and I'm grounded and all those things.
Yeah.
And I don't know why it doesn't get talked about so much, because it's not a high and lofty kind of thing. It's just, I'm just a nicer human being. And not only, in terms of my behavior, but also in terms of how I feel at peace, which has got to be a good thing. And I'm always struck by, it says, man's made in the image of God. And that could sound kind of horribly arrogant, but I've always took that to mean like, hey, your body, not your image, but your body, there's something special there. There's something that's a bit more to it. And certainly from the New Testament tradition of eating of the body of Christ, I mean, it doesn't get more embodied than that. I mean, that's actually quite strange when we look at it from outside. Taking on the body of the sort of archetype of the spiritual, Son of God. I mean, wow, what could be a more beautiful embodied practice?
Yeah, well said, brother. There's this beautiful story in Ezekiel called the Valley of the Dry Bones. And this vision appears before the prophet Ezekiel. He sees this valley of bones, dry, dead bones. And the Spirit of God descends and tells Ezekiel to prophesize to these bones, to tell the bones to come to life. Ezekiel prophesizes to the bones. The bones, in fact, they come to life. Now there's these skeletons, yet they have no flesh, no spirit within them. They're just dry bones. And then God tells Ezekiel, now prophesies the breath. And when the breath of life comes into the bones, then the bones begin to take flesh, life, spirit into them, and a massive, mighty army now is formed from what was this skeleton, dry-boned valley. And
well, breath and
realized
spirit are the same word. They're the same word in Hebrew and Greek. Breath, which the Bible was written in, breath and spirit are the same word. So it's like there's this clear kind of breath-centered tradition, dare we say?
Exactly.
And there's so many other bodily things that I just feel like when people say, you know, like Eve was created from Adam's rib, some people say, oh, that's saying women are lesser or it's sexist. And I just hear that to say, no, like that's how close we are to our spouses. That's how intimate we are with our spouses. You know, there's a way in which they're created from our own bodies. You know, I find that profoundly beautiful piece of theology. You know, I don't think that's literally what happened historically, you know, but as a piece of sort of psychological truth, I found that beautiful. And I know you actually wrote a book on how to treat your wife, right? Like I should probably pay some attention to you, Sarah, on this, as a man who's been married longer than I have.
Yeah, that was my first book. That was the book I wished I never had to write, though.
Right, you learned some things the hard way, did you?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so listen, we're really, I could talk to you for hours on this stuff. There's so much here. Okay, so let's link in one more thing then. So we've looked at CrossFit and, you know, obviously the fact that it's holistic and there's psychological side, spiritual side to that, and there's a physical side to spirituality, even in Christian tradition. Let's bring in the Krav Maga then. So the third kind of thread I see in your kind of training here. You're the first guy we've had on the show who's been trained in that. I've come across it in Israel. So tell us what it is. What is Krav Maga?
Sure. You know, I was just on another podcast talking about Krav Maga, CrossFit, yoga. And what I realized is that we're compelled to follow, to learn from people. And so what inspired me to continue a lifetime of training in CrossFit wasn't CrossFit, it was Coach Glassman. What inspired me to a practice of yoga wasn't yoga per se, it was Mark Devine and Rolf Gates, my two primary teachers. And what inspired me to continue a lifetime of training in Krav Maga was a gentleman named Wandale Theus. 5 days after I found CrossFit, I saw a flyer in Sacramento. There was going to be a one-day course on knife defense for law enforcement in Krav Maga. That was intriguing. So off I went to Sacramento. My instructor that day was Wandale. Wandale, for me at that time, he was the epitome of what I aspired to be as a warrior, as a leader, as a martial artist. He was the embodiment of a true warrior. The guy was just phenomenal. He just had that presence that you were compelled to follow, He was a SWAT operator from Santa Monica Police Department, been one of the very first black belts in Krav Maga. The lineage of him to Amy Litchford, the founder of CrossFit, was just one person removed. So he was close to the source, an amazing guy. And I took that one course and really never looked back. I expressed my interest in continuing training. They were at that time about a year, and when I say they, the governing body at that time for Krav Maga in the U.S. was called Krav Maga Worldwide. Now there's multiple bodies of authority of licensing, but at that time, Krav Maga Worldwide was the number one.
So for listeners, Krav Maga comes from Israel, used by the Israeli military. Super practical system of self-defense, involved knife disarms, guns. It's not a traditional martial art. It's very much a sort of practical self-defense system. Lots of styles now, lots of ways it can be trained, but has a kind of emphasis on pragmatism. So sort of police officers, military, different people like that tend to use it.
Yeah, and that's for many years, that was at least in the United States, in order to get into the program of Krav Maga from Worldwide, you had to be in law enforcement or military. They subsequently divided the system in half. There's Krav Maga Force Training Division, which is exclusive to first responder, military, law enforcement. Then there's Krav Maga Worldwide. They have a belt system for non-public safety. What really inspired me, in addition to Wandale and his method of teaching, was that the system complemented CrossFit in that they were teaching me not so much techniques, they were teaching me principles. So in CrossFit, there's principles of movement, such as core to extremity, active shoulder. These principles govern all the variety of subsequent movements you may or may not do in any given workout. Therefore, if you learn the principle, you're very adept at any skill that may be necessitated in a particular workout. That was the same theme I found in Krav Maga. I was learning principles that allowed me in very rapidly evolving, very dangerous, stressful situations that happened in the law enforcement profession. These principles, they allowed me to make very, very fast decisions very safely, very competently.
This is important, isn't it? Because you can't possibly train for every variety of situation. And this could also count for psychological training, emotional training, but if you learn a few fundamental principles, that's there for whatever diversity of situations actually comes up. This is why when I teach my trainers in embodiment, I'm teaching the principles of embodiment, because I don't know what it's like to teach a queer tango class in Moscow. I don't know. You know what I mean? That real example, I don't know what that's like. So I've got to teach this person the principle so that whatever way they're using it, they can apply it.
That's awesome. Yeah. So that's what I noticed. The unified theme was this encouragement for the adaptation, the understanding of principles of movement. The other theme that really resonated with me, being a Christian, was the mantra of Krav Maga. To learn Krav Maga, one would study in order to walk in peace. And so that's the mantra of Krav Maga: learn Krav Maga, and so that you can walk in peace. And that really affected me at the soul level. That was something that, despite the harshness, the violence of the program, ultimately the intention was to walk in peace. And what I found is, as I mentioned earlier, as my capacity in Krav Maga increased, as my physical fitness in CrossFit increased, as my self-awareness, self-realization increased, although it's hard to explain, it's elusive, it's intangible, yet I know without a shadow of a doubt that my presence alone at very critical moments in my career was enough to diffuse what would have otherwise potentially been a situation that would have gravitated towards shooting or some more catastrophic type of experience.
I think this is not understood about the true martial artist. I spoke to one of my old Aikido senseis today. I'm going to Japan. I just phoned him up, and what you get a sense of, and all the true martial artists we've had on this show, like Steve Rowe and Darren Doherty, or different Tai Chi martial arts people, is that they're all really interested in peace. They're all interested in finding peace in themselves and also being a force for peace in the world.
Yeah.
And that's easily misunderstood. And the military and police people that I resonate with, family in the military, I've trained some police officers, the same thing. And I think sometimes feel like people don't always understand this, who are coming from outside of martial arts, military, police. They don't understand that actually that desire for peace is really at the heart of all those things.
Right. Yeah, there's this beautiful story that's told in the book, The Warrior Way, or Way of the Warrior. It reflects on this critical time in a small village in Japan called Kyoto, where this band of rogue warriors were going to raid through this town, through this village. At the time, there was no one to defend the village except an old monk. The old monk put out a desperate call for help. 3 samurai arrived to help defend the village. They wanted the honor of defending this village. And so the monk devised a test to determine who would be the samurai that would have this opportunity. The test was rather simple. He had one of his servants stand behind the threshold of a doorway with a sword raised overhead. The monk told that servant, "Here's what you do. Whoever walks through this door, without hesitation, just cut them down." So these 3 samurai arrive, and the first samurai is young, full of ego, full of temper. He's fired up, and he volunteers to go first. So he walks through the threshold of this door, and immediately, boom, this servant cuts him down, kills him. Now there's 2 samurai left. So the next day, the slightly more evolved samurai elects to take the test, and the monk says, very well, all you have to do is walk through this doorway. And that samurai walks with a little bit more care, a little bit more attention to detail. And just as he goes in the threshold of the doorway, as that lethal blow is coming down, he has enough time to take out his sword and deflect that incoming blow. And he thinks for sure that he will be selected to defend the village. And he comes out feeling triumphant. And the monk says, nope, you're not the one. The next day, there's 1 samurai left, and this samurai is told all you have to do is go walk through that doorway. And he begins to walk towards the door. Approximately 10 feet away from the doorway, he just stops, becomes still, takes a deep breath, and then he says, you, behind the door, come out, or we will both surely perish. And the monk says, you're the one that's going to save the village.
Yeah, Kurosawa immortalized that in one of his films, I think, actually, as well. Kyoto is the old capital. I'll be in Kyoto pretty soon, actually. So I'll be thinking of you while I'm there. I'm going to be a beautiful city. So,
the reason I love that story is, I know that at one time in my life, I was that warrior that just rushed in, and then 5-6 years later, a bit more evolved. Now I realize, okay, like I'm going to be a little bit more mindful, a bit more tactful, but I still go in. Now I'm at that point where I'm beginning to develop the ability to have such expanded awareness that I can begin to aspire to behave like the true samurai that's able to project the awareness so far into the future, so far into their surroundings, that they now don't even need to engage. They can defuse situations simply through the projection of their awareness.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. We're moving towards the close now. Couple of things to finish here. Couple of things. I mean, first of all, is there anything else you'd like to speak about? We'll give people a chance to find you online as well. But before that.
No, brother, I'm up for anything. Whatever you want to go with.
I feel like we're moving towards a close here. We've covered so much good ground. I've really appreciated talking, CrossFit. You've opened my mind to that as well. And it's so nice to hear a kind of Christian perspective on here. So thank you for bringing that. Where can people find out more about you? Like, you've got a new book coming out. I'll make sure I link to your website, gregory&nbsp.com, right?
Yes, sir. That's it. Yeah, okay. The new book, I'm just thrilled about it. It's my first fable. It's called The Warrior and the Monk. And it's that timeless quest that we're all on. In the story, you and I and the reader is the warrior. And the tendency of the warrior is to search for treasure, which is simply a metaphor for anything we think will bring us happiness. And as we're searching for treasure, we therefore simultaneously defend our treasure against dragons. And this monk comes on scene to help the warrior realize that the ultimate treasure they're looking for is not out there in the world, it's within them, which means that the dragons that they're facing are likewise not out there in the world. It's our own limited, self-defeating thinking. So it's this evolution that takes place. The journey that leads us into the world ultimately leads us back into our heart, into our soul.
Beautiful. And any final message, Greg, about the body for our listeners?
That's that's a good, I think we have to, I'm a big fan, this word sadhana. I think it's such a beautiful word. It means, my understanding is it means daily practice. And anything that we practice, we will find some level of competency in, some level of improvement, ultimately some level of mastery. Therefore, what I would hope the listener would do is engage on a daily sadhana, a daily practice. Yet, as much as I'm historically the CrossFit guy, really what I want to encourage people to do is to develop a holistic practice, something that is developing, yes, of course, the body, yet perhaps even more important, the mind, and truly the most important, the spirit.
Beautiful. Greg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, brother.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.